So let's begin. You will have noticed already, I'm sure, that I have a guest this morning. It's Richard Abramson. Hello, Richard. And he's here to
Hello,
speak
Robin.
about, hello, here to speak about Shakespeare. Little introduction for you, Richard, if you don't mind. I'd like to tell people after a long career in maths and finance, two subjects that I find difficult to contend with, Richard became increasingly drawn to the poetry and plays of Shakespeare. So he read for an MA in Shakespeare Studies at Royal Holloway. And in addition to continuing with those studies, he now runs groups for his local U3A. So, Richard, you're very welcome to join us, a real Shakespeare scholar. We usually have a chat in the chat room over there with people who've joined us. And what mostly people do is announce what the weather is like wherever they happen to be. And it's very sunny today, of course. It's an inescapable topic, and Shakespeare, of course, was no exception. He spoke about the weather in different ways, but not just as a meteorological phenomenon. For him, it was full of symbolism, and that's what we're going to discuss today, specifically Shakespeare's references to the sun. But before we get on to that, the detail of that, I just want to ask you, Richard, if you don't mind, what inspired and continues to inspire your study of Shakespeare?
As you said, Robin, my early love was really for maths and science, but actually, since school, I have loved Shakespeare. I've enjoyed the magic of the writing and going to the plays. Along with that, for many years, like yourself, I've been studying philosophy here at this school, and it seemed to me that Shakespeare understood uh, the essence of this magic search for the human nature and expressed it better and more beautifully than anybody else. Um, so I was drawn to it more and more. I began to learn, for example, a few sonnets by heart, which I found a wonder. Um, and then later on, some friends introduced me to a book by John Vyvyan called The Shakespearean Ethic. And it seemed to me it hit the nail on the head. It's a wonderful book, but it'd been out of print for decades. So I worked with these friends to have the book republished, and that was done. It was good, a bit of fun. Um, and in order to spread the word a little, I started doing some talks on Shakespeare, uh, and that led to a situation where, when I was coming up to retirement, well, what am I going to do? Bit of a vacuum opening up, and partly with all this work in the background, I was able to get on to a master's course, which you mentioned, in Shakespeare studies at the Royal Holloway College. A couple of years for which I will ever be grateful. It was a lovely time to just discuss just Shakespeare with brilliant minds, and some of them young minds as well. And then, with the sort of certificate in my pocket, I felt competent to run some Shakespeare groups, and now run several a week, which is absorbing, and it's wonderful to share my joy of Shakespeare. That's how it came about.
It's lovely to have somebody who's so passionate about a subject, any subject, but that magic you speak of, that's the unquantifiable essence of it, isn't it? And that's where, if we go deeply into that, it seems that we then find resonance with all the different philosophical traditions and their meaning. And again, it's unfathomable, but you know it's there. And in Shakespeare, it's expressed with such beauty and such entertainment, really.
Yeah.
Your dissertation paper for the MA was entitled More Light, More Light. So you chose to focus on the sun in Shakespeare. So here we are. You say there's a lot of references to the sun in Shakespeare, and just roughly to give us a sense of how many and a few examples, some of which may or may not be familiar to us.
Sure. So I found, uh, with a little technological help, there were about 300 references directly to either to the sun or to its equivalent of the god of the sun, Apollo or Phoebus, that sort of thing. 300 is quite a lot. And then there are all sorts of indirect references. So some examples. So the ones I quote in my dissertation, when Prince Hal, the yet to be Henry V, is talking to Falstaff, he talks about the blessed sun himself. Another part of Henry IV, one of the characters uses the phrase, and gorgeous as the sun at midsummer. Let's turn to a more allegorical quote, but it shows Shakespeare's love for the sun when Henry V is wooing Catherine, the French princess, and he's trying to say, yes, I'm just a bare soldier, but I've got a great heart. And what he specifically says is, but a good heart, Kate, is the sun and the moon, or rather the sun and not the moon, for it shines bright and never changes, but keeps his course truly. And it's this constancy, as we'll perhaps come on to, that is vital to Shakespeare about love, and it is symbolized by the constant sun. And then final quote, which I think will be ever so well known to people, the beginning of Richard III. Shakespeare loved a pun. if he could find one, he'd use it. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Here it's talking about the person who was the child of York, the son of York, but it's also the sun and made glorious summer. He used it in so many different ways. I hope that gives some feel for it.
It does, and it shows the greatness of his writing and how people can argue, does it mean this or does it mean that? And actually it means both. It means both at the same time.
It means both.
And you mentioned John Vyvyan, and he equates quite a lot of Shakespeare's thinking to Platonic thought, and just you mentioned the goodness there, and shining bright, and there's obviously a reference or an allusion, at least mythologically, to this sense of the sun symbolizing that which permeates everything with its warmth and light, which Ficino picks up, the Renaissance philosopher. There's no evidence that Shakespeare read them, but it's in the thinking of the times. I think it's really interesting. So I looked at the sun. Obviously, I did a little bit of research, you'll be happy to know, for this talk. And I read that it's an orb of hot plasma heated to incandescence by nuclear fusion, which is fascinating. They're not especially romantic. It provides warmth and light, of course. And for Shakespeare, warmth and light, as we've seen. But what does that actually mean, figuratively, metaphorically, and even spiritually? What does the sun mean to Shakespeare?
I think when you say it's fascinating about the hot plasma, you don't really mean it, because I'm not sure you actually find that fascinating. To me, it's absolutely amazing what the sun really is. But let's look at what it was in Shakespeare's time. In Shakespeare's time, it's very clear from what he writes in his plays, we don't have to go outside of the plays, that the earth was seen as a globe, which it is, a round globe, and the sun was a ball of fire that circled the earth day and night, that produced day and night, and it went underneath the opposite side of the earth at night. And this was part of a system, the sun, the moon, the stars, which circled the earth's center in spheres and in fixed spheres. Slightly odd to our current way of thinking, but that's how it was for millennia. People assumed that there were these spheres that held these heavenly objects, and they were fixed in their progression. And if you were particularly acute, you could even hear the music of the spheres. And in a few places, Shakespeare refers to this music of the spheres. So within this system, the sun has a very obvious importance. And Shakespeare was fond not only of the sun, but particularly of the rising sun. We nowadays often use pictures of setting sun and love to watch the setting sun, but for Shakespeare, the beautiful moment was the rising of the sun. When you think about it, it's not surprising. We're looking at old times when there was no electricity, no gas, and nighttime was the beginning of cold, dark, and maybe danger. And the sun rising was vital and a brilliant expression of the rising of consciousness, really. So I'll give another quote. Beginning of a sonnet. Full many a glorious morning have I seen. Sorry, my camera seems to have gone up. There we are.
Yes, though you're back on a different camera. Mine seems to have frozen. I don't know if
No
I'm
matter.
even audible, but
Yes.
carry on.
Full many a glorious morning have I seen flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing the golden face with meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy. That's just glorious. So it's this light that it shines and its constancy that's so vital. So, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, on the balcony scene, a moment of great passion, he wants to swear his eternal love to Juliet. He wants to swear it by what's apparent at night time, the moon. And she says, "Oh, swear not the inconstant moon." And what about Juliet herself? Well, when he looks up at the bell, but look, what light on yonder window shines. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. So you see, Juliet is analogous to the sun itself. And moreover, not only to the sun, but to the rising sun. It is the east. So this is the importance that Shakespeare attaches to the sun. And it's an expression of the highest consciousness. And I know it's stretching a point to say Juliet, who after all is a teenager in love, and he writes beautifully about just that. She's a teenager besotted by Romeo. But she's also the rising sun. And the perfection of love for Romeo. So going back to what the sun is, just clear, there's no question of kind of the sun itself being other than a body, but that is hot and provides light, but it's used as a metaphor for perfection. Well, another example I point to is at the end of Shakespeare's final play, or probably final play, The Tempest. Prospero, this great magician master, has all his enemies in his power, and he's got them under a charm. But he decides to undo the magic charm. And looking at them as the charm unfolds, he says this: "The charm dissolves apace, and as the morning steals upon the night, melting the darkness, so their rising senses begin to chase the ignorant fumes that mantle their clearer reason." So what we've got is reason arising to kill ignorance, just like the sun rises in the morning. A nice analogy, and frequent throughout Shakespeare.
Beautiful. That's lovely. I'm aware that my image seems to have frozen. Can you hear me though, Richard?
I can hear you very well.
Well, then
And
I'm an
so it's
audio.
an interesting still we've got of you, but
Well, I look particularly
we'll
interested
live with
in what
that.
you're saying, which is no misrepresentation of what's taking place. But for some reason, my camera has gone. So anyway, I'm an audio presence, but you're visual enough for us, Richard.
Oh, good.
But that's marvelous. I'd like to just ask then about the converse, just to go over that a little, because there's light and there's dark, there's shadow, and there's the moon, there's eclipses, and Shakespeare, I know, speaks of the dark with as much resonant symbolism as he speaks about the sun. And we don't have a lot of time left, of course, but I just
No,
wondered if we could just address this a little.
I'd be delighted. And indeed, Shakespeare was. He loved talking about darkness. And I suppose it's because it's so full of dramatic potential. Um, let's take Macbeth, an intensely dark play where everything is turned upside down. The witches say fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air, so you can't see. And it means it's impossible for Macbeth to see what's right. He kills his king, Duncan. When does he do that? In the middle of the night. He kills Banquo, his most faithful friend. And when does he do that? At night. Lady Macbeth, in deciding on whether to, not deciding, but bringing in the powers necessary for this desperately evil act of killing Duncan, when she says, "Hark, that Raven himself is hoarse, that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan," and so on. But at the end of that speech, chillingly, she says, "Come, thick night, and pull the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold." Yeah. So I know time is running a little short, so one could go on with other examples of dark. I mean, in The Tempest, which I've already referred to, Prospero tells the tale of how he and Miranda, his daughter, were snatched away from Milan. And when were they snatched away? At the dead of night. All these terrible things happen when the sun is not there. Just examples.
Lovely. Well, I don't suppose we should wander too much into the gloom, really. Do you have something bright for us just to read? Is there a quote there that perhaps we talked earlier on about transformation and something about
Okay, so
the lifting of the
as you say,
dawn?
well, let's take Henry V, the perfect king. He starts off as Hal, the wayward son of Henry IV, and he's in there with Falstaff and his disreputable mates in the pub. But he says that he knows what's going on, and herein will I imitate the sun that doth permit the base contagious clouds to hide his glory. So he says right at the beginning, actually, within me, there's the sunshine. And then if we look at him, when he becomes king and he's put all this rotten side to one side, he and the prologue describes how he goes around as king, helping the soldiers, and describes the way he acts as a largesse universal, like the sun. That it's a wonderful analogy, and it continues throughout the sun analogy. So many
Well,
in history plays,
yes.
but that will do.
And that's the perennial image then of the light. And actually that famous phrase, a little touch of Harry in the night, takes on so much more
Mm.
meaning because, however dark it gets, there is always that little touch of Harry. There's the light there. Okay, well, we have to close it. I'm sorry, I'm just a frozen entity there, but very much alive, I can assure you. Richard, it was lovely, fascinating. We'll put some further reading in the notes, but we have to conclude it there. Thank you so much for joining us. It was
Pleasure.
wonderful, fascinating, and look forward to seeing you again. Just for everybody else, Philosophy Live is here on Fridays during the term time, and it's on Facebook and YouTube. And we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, bye bye. Bye bye, everybody who's watching.
Great.